Hello, my name is Fausto, and I'm going to be talking about Chapter 2 Algorithm and the article Power Through the Algorithm, Participatory Web Cultures and the Technological Unconscious by David Beer. So, in Chapter 2 Algorithm, he talks about what the word algorithm, and how it's perceived. So he says, by the public eye, the word algorithm seems complex. It seems something that is incomprehensible and seems out of reach. But for software engineers, it is something super simple. It is something they work with every day. It is something that they see is not as complex as obviously as the public. So then he says how the word algorithm originates from the Hindu-Arabic decimal system, which is originally called algorithm, but it is also called algorithm. So he then talks about how the makers of the algorithm and what they perceive what an algorithm is. So from the makers of the algorithm, the term refers to the logical series of steps for organizing and acting on a body of data. So it takes all the data from a user and it organizes it into different spaces. For designers though, algorithms comes from the generation of the model. So it formalizes a problem, and its goal is to articulate it into a computer. So it gets the problem and it tries to solve it by using different kinds of data in order to solve that issues, and it stores it in different places. So he then talks about how an algorithm does not choose the correct pathway, but rather choosing one of many possible past user experiences. So contemporary algorithms are trained on existing data. Data comes from users from past practices or past experiences that they had on the internet. So he then talks about how software engineers improve algorithms. So he states that it's really about redesigning the whole algorithm itself, but instead taking little pieces of it and tweaking it. So he describes it as not just one tool, but many tools being fixed by many people. So there's thousands and thousands of little tweakings going on throughout the algorithm by thousands of software engineers that are working to get that problem fixed, or whether it's bug fixes or anything like that, which we also see in today's society with our phones even, that we constantly have to update apps and stuff, but it's not redesigning the algorithm, but instead it's just tweaking and doing bug fixes. So he then talks about how calling the algorithm a complex socio-technical assemblage avoids the expertise needed to understand the different elements of an algorithm. So he then talks about how the singular term algorithm stands for a complex technological assemblage. It is important to distinguish the different factors of the algorithm. So that's enough for that chapter. I'm moving on to the article Power Through the Algorithm, Participatory Web Cultures and the Technological Unconscious by David Beer. So David Beer stresses on Web 2.0, and which was made popular by Tim O'Reilly. He talks about how the 2.0 aspect of Web 2.0, how it represents an upgrade. So our generation went through an upgrade of 1.0 to 2.0. And he also talks about how in the future, maybe we'll go to 2.1 or 3.0, depending on the upgrade. So he talks about how the Web 2.0, the shift toward user-generated content and the move from desktop storage to computer access, and how the Web 2.0 really stresses unity, how it stresses collaborativity throughout its users, and how it's supposed to be empowerment and it's supposed to be democratized. So he also uses an author called Scott Lash a lot in his article. He mentions him a lot throughout the article itself, and Scott Lash produced an article called New Media Ontology. So the term is designed to capture a shift towards a form of living in which information becomes active in shaping users' lives. And then he talks about how software intervening in all aspects of life and sinking into the space that is most often taken for granted. So the space that I'm talking about is basically our everyday lives, how it sinks into our social media platforms, how it sinks into mainly our social media platforms, because that's something that we use every day, and how it gathers information about us every single day without us knowing. So then he talks about how the algorithm decides what comes first in a search. So basically, when we search something up on Google, we always see that there's millions of results, but we usually tend to only click to the results on the first page. So of course, we don't decide what, or humans do not decide what goes on the first page. It's usually targeted ads, or it's usually what the algorithm decides to put first. So he talks about how Lash was in a very complicated structure, of course. Much of Lash's article is dedicated to fishing out what is described as a power binary. So the power binary is where the algorithm has moved out into the everyday, and the power operates from within instead of from the outside. So the new forms that Lash describes are built on the central idea that algorithms have the capacity to shape our cultural and social ideas, basically, and they shape the way that we basically live our life. So of course he states that overall software has sunk into our lives without us knowing it, and it means that software structures are in the inside rather than on the everyday, on the inside rather than on the outside. So then Beer talks about what does this mean for the Web 2.0 going forward. So he talks about technological unconscious, which of course it means they operate unseen, and in the unknown, without anybody knowing how it works. So basically, how the public does not know what's going on behind the scenes of an application. The public does not know what goes on, where our data is going to specifically. Like when I pull up Instagram, I never know like where the pictures are actually going, or and mainly even if you search up your name on Google, you will see a lot of your pictures from social media sites on the images tab. I'm sure everybody has looked up their name at least once. And you see a lot of information there that you did not actually put there, but the algorithm put that there because they got that data from another site, of course. So then talks about the forms of power within the Web 2.0 applications and how they hold, of course, like he talks about Facebook, which is a company worth $1.5 billion just by data mining and by collecting people's data. And he says it's super, super urgent that people need to start investigating into this, into the data mining, and into how the Web 2.0 apps are clearly on the inside. So he talks about how, as of now, which I'm guessing when the book was published, as of now, we do not understand how it plays out in individual user lives. So, of course, he talks about how individual users, he does not know exactly how it plays out, how the algorithm affects each user. But as we're moving into a different age, I guess, you do see a lot of lawsuits going into, I mean, every day you hear news about how Facebook has gotten sued over privacy laws, over privacy data. Actually, there was even a case in Illinois where Facebook had to give each user that they were using geological locations. They were actually paying people that they stole that data without their knowledge, without an agreement, of course. So there's definitely a move forward into investigation. I know the government has tried investigating into how the algorithm works and how it's taking our data, but we're definitely moving into an age where we don't know what is going on with our data, and we don't know what our data is being used for. At least for me, I have no clue where all these social media platforms are putting my data, but I just know it's a new way of life, and I think everybody has kind of gotten used to the fact that our lives, our data pretty much is all over the internet. So I think by the next generation, I think they're just going to be used to the fact that there's all your data in one place, whether we like it or not.